Good afternoon to everyone, all our guests that made the time to be with us this afternoon. Welcome. My name is Buhle Banyoni from Legal&Tax, and we've put together a very lovely webinar today. It's themed Women and the Law in honor of August being the month of women, and we're officially closing off Women's Month today, where we celebrated the achievements of all women in South Africa. And women are a force to be reckoned with. As the saying goes, "Wathinta abafazi, wathinta imbokodo," which means you strike a woman, you strike a rock. And the law protects the rights of women and promotes gender equality. Issues such as gender-based violence, sexual harassment, and discrimination are some of the many challenges that women face in our society. But with Legal&Tax as your companion, we ensure that your rights as a woman are always upheld. And I'm joined by two legal companions who will be discussing the rights of women both at home and in the workplace. I'd like to welcome Michael Visser, who is head of legal helpline here at Legal&Tax, as well as Simone. Hi, how are you doing, Michael?
Good, thank you.
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining us. And the lovely Simone Bodley, who is one of our legal advisors. Hi, Simone.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm awesome, thanks. So welcome guys, welcome to our guests, and thanks for joining me today. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. I would like for us to begin by looking at the rights of women at work. And I mean, it goes without saying that our Constitution advocates for equal rights for both men and women. But we have seen a prevalence, especially in the work environment, where women become victimized, and they find themselves in a position where they are sexually harassed by their fellow colleagues or even by their direct employer. So Simone, I'd like for you to just help us understand what is sexual harassment.
Okay, well, firstly, in terms of sexual harassment, you have to look at what the actual definition is, and it actually then breaks off into the different elements of wanting to and needing to prove that. So the definition for sexual harassment is the unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that violates the rights of an employee and constitutes a barrier to equality in the workplace. So if you break that down, it is, well, when you look at the factors of it, it's definitely unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. And when you look at sexual nature, they mean verbal, non-verbal, physical, even virtual nowadays. So then the next thing is violates the rights of the employee. So if the more it violates the rights, the worse it is, obviously. And then it is a barrier to equality, to equity in the workplace, which means that it's a barrier to you as a person to continue working at the workplace.
Okay. And who can become a victim of sexual harassment? Both becoming the victim and being the perpetrator.
Okay, so in terms of the victim and the perpetrator, it's not merely a question of who, it's a question of where. So in terms of that, it's not always a co-worker or a superior or supervisor or something like that. It is anybody in your working environment, and that could be a contractor or a supplier or anything relating to your workplace and you performing your duties.
Okay. And where can sexual harassment take place?
Okay, so when we're talking about conduct of this nature, it is anywhere where you are working. So if you, for example, are a sales rep that has to go to clients, going to stores, things like that, that is your working environment also. So you need to, as long as you're performing your duty somewhere, it can take place in that place. So for example, Another good example is also if you are going to like your annual Christmas parties, conferences, things like that. Remember, you are there in a working capacity. So if anything of that nature takes place there, it is sexual harassment in the workplace.
Okay, great. Before we continue, I just want to mention to our guests, if you have any questions, we have a Q&A, chat box where you can, type in your questions. And then at the end of the segment, we'll have our experts address your questions or any queries that you may have. So while we're going through it, just, be mindful of the fact that it is available. So just type in your question. Okay, cool. Simone, how do I report an incident of a sexual nature, and who do I report it to?
Okay, so in terms of reporting, you have to do it in writing. It's not only for the company that you have to report it in writing, it's also for you to keep a record of yourself. So try and be as detailed as possible when you do report it. I know it would be difficult, even though I've never been in that situation. I understand that it's a very difficult situation you find yourself in, but it's best to record it as best you can, as detailed as you can in writing, to either, if you work in a big company that has its own HR, to human resources, or to your superior if it's not your superior. However, if it's your superior that you are complaining about, you need to go higher up to them, even if it is to the owner of the business at that point in time. But make sure you report it to someone who will have the authority to investigate it.
Okay. And after you've then lodged your complaint, what should your employer do about it?
Okay. So in terms of that, when it comes to grievances and things like these of this nature, they need to investigate it somehow. As I've always explained it, they have to do an interview with you at least. That is my personal opinion. Some people don't always work that way. They work off your statement if your statement is detailed enough. So they have to investigate it in some shape or form. And that investigation will also depend on how big your business is, how established the human resources is, things like that. But usually it's an interview, it's an investigation, and they will interview the perpetrator as well. But hopefully they'll do that separately, because that is generally how things are done. After that, then, you can also request in that time that the person be suspended during the investigation, should that be necessary.
Okay. And if you find yourself in a position where your employer is not willing to investigate, or just to delve deeper into your grievance,
sadly sadly that is the reality of quite a few people, and that's unfortunately why there is so many court cases regarding this very issue. So in terms thereof, if the company doesn't do anything, if they simply ignore you, the chances are that this once off, maybe twice off conduct will continue, and the chances are that it will actually get worse, because your perpetrator is getting away with his bad behavior. So what's to say to stop him now? And when that does happen, your options are very limited, because you can most of the time, for your own mental health, your physical health even, you cannot continue working there. And in that instance, the workplace becomes intolerable. And my advice at that point in time would then to rather look for an alternative, either to be moved or to resign.
Okay. So if you find yourself backed into a corner and you feel like the only way out, or the only kind of choice that you have at that point, is to resign, what will happen? What sort of recourse can you take after that? Because I would assume that it's unethical. So what recourse action would you be able to take after that?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So we have quite a few things that we can do, but the best thing that you can do is to refer the matter to the CCMA. So the reason why I use the word intolerable so much is because the definition for constructive dismissal contains that word. Your work environment must be so bad that it's intolerable and you can no longer work there. Sexual harassment fits well, sadly, perfectly into that definition, because how can you work with someone who harasses you in that way every day, every week, however it is? So in terms of that, you refer the matter to the CCMA and let the matter take its course. It's classified as constructive dismissal then, and the maximum compensation you can get, as far as I'm aware at the moment, is 12 months.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Simone.
Welcome.
I'd like to move over to you, Michael. And I hope that you can help us dissect the term gender equality. Help us understand, what does gender equality mean?
Okay, I think before I actually answer the question, I want the listeners or viewers to understand that we are talking about broader global topics, and then we're boiling it down later on into South African law. So some of these terms are international law or in international sphere that we are dealing with. So gender equality on a basic level is where it's a state in which access to rights of opportunities is unaffected by your gender, which basically means if I am a woman and you are a man, we have the same equal rights, and you are not limited by the fact that you are female, or I'm not limited by the fact that I'm female. It is an arbitrary ground for discrimination. So the ideal would be that all opportunities and rights are exactly the same for either male or female.
Okay. And what are some of the laws that protect gender equality?
Okay. This is now specifically down to South African law, as this is where we know the best side of it. It's based in the Constitution. Okay, so we have a situation where the highest law in the country is the Constitution. In the Constitution, Section 9 or Chapter 9, it specifically deals with you cannot discriminate against anybody in terms of race, sex, religion, gender, and there's a complete list there. But this is included into that. So every piece of legislation that is promulgated in South Africa makes provision for these things as it would have been seen in the Constitution, because you cannot set up a set of insubordinate legislation that goes against the Constitution, and it will be tested in court in such a way. But to give you a practical example, you can look, for example, at the Labour Relations Act, where it makes specific provision for things such as sexual harassment, also in terms of the Code of Good Practice that was published there. But you will get other types of legislation that does exactly the same. So it's all about promoting the fact that there will be no discrimination, unfair discrimination based on these types of issues, of which gender and sex is exactly it fits into that definition, yes.
Okay. And can you help us understand, what is the Commission for Gender Equality, and what role do they play?
Okay, so it is a state institution that is supporting constitutional democracy. Putting that into simple terms, in terms of, as we said, in terms of Chapter 9, you have these rules that we all have to adhere to. And this is now an organization that was set up specifically to monitor, promote, and protect and evaluate gender equality in South Africa. So they go through the processes of looking at legislation. They look at private companies, public companies, or government institutions. And whenever they see something coming up that could be discrimination based on gender or that affects gender equality, they step in. So they are there as a watchdog, to use a simple term for that.
Okay. Right, thanks, Michael. I'd like us to move over now and look at the rights of women in the home. We know the rates of, domestic violence in South Africa specifically are quite shocking, and there's been a big plight, to fight against gender-based violence and abuse in the home. Can you help us understand, firstly, what is gender-based violence?
Okay. So I'm going to use a definition here that is from the United Nations Declaration on Elimination of Violence Against Women. Okay, because as I said, this is a global term that is used. It's not just applicable to South Africa. So I'm going to read it off for you, and then we're going to dissect it into certain pieces. Okay, it's any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to a woman, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of rights, whether occurring in public or in private. Okay, so if we are going to dissect this, you will hear that I emphasize certain things. So it shall be included to be understood as physical, sexual, and psychological violence. Okay, that is quite self-explanatory, occurring in the family and in the community. Okay, so more specifically, this will include battery, sexual assault, female children. Some of these topics that I'm going to bring up here it's not nice topics to talk about, but it is in the definition as it's accepted. Sexual abuse of female children, dowry-related violences, marital rape, female genital mutilation, and other traditional practices harmful to women, non-spousal violence and violence related to exploitation, sexual harassment and intimidation at work, in educational institutions and elsewhere, trafficking women and forced prostitution, and violence perpetrated on or condoned by the state. So you'll see this is an all-encompassing definition or an attempt at that to, on a global scale, try and define everything that you would consider to be gender-based violence.
Okay, wow. And is there a difference between, well, surely there is. Can you take us through what the difference is between gender-based violence and domestic violence?
Okay, so domestic violence is a small subcategory of gender-based violence. So this is specifically where you look at a domestic relationship between someone, typically a husband and a wife, or somebody who has children together, they live in the same home. So this is a small aspect, just as the labor side is a small aspect of gender-based violence, so also is domestic violence a small aspect of this.
Okay.
Yes, I also want to discuss what is domestic violence specifically in terms of South African law. So we have the Domestic Violence Act 116 of 1998. There is an amendment bill in working that we'll talk about later. But once again, this is now the South African, I won't say watered down version, but specifically made for South Africa. So this is the current definition that we are dealing with, okay? Any form of abuse, which includes physical, sexual, emotional, psychological. So those things you will recognize from the first part that we did on gender-based violence. But they will also see economic harassment, damage to property, stalking, entry into a person's property without their consent, any other abusive or controlling behavior where such conduct causes harm or may cause harm to your health, safety, or well-being. So this is specifically in terms of South African legislation adapted for the South African, let's say, milieu. A few of the things, once again, I don't want to be too technical, but I want to bring this up because this is how you will identify if this could be domestic violence. So remember, you must be in a domestic relationship. So for example, if I have a friend and he harasses me, this is not a domestic relationship because we don't live together. But if it is my wife or the mother of my children, this is a domestic relationship, or my grandparents, or my parents-in-law, or whoever. Okay. So as I went through the definition, there was physical abuse. That was number one. So there's 9 factors here that I'm going to discuss. Physical abuse, typical example, slapping, punching, kicking, etc. Okay. This is also aggravated in terms of assault with guns, knives, same as assault, but specifically now in a domestic relationship. Okay. Sexual abuse. This is unfortunately also a reality in South Africa. It's rape, attempted rape, indecent assault. This is also not just included into a physical part, but also a mental part. It can be sexual slurs being used, which I will not use on air, but sexual slurs used by, let's say, men against women. That can also be sexual abuse. Okay, the third one was emotional, verbal, and psychological abuse. This can be anything from constant insults to ridicule or name calling. Then we have economic abuse, which is an interesting one, but something that must be taken into account in South Africa. A typical example of this would be me and my wife were married, and I go and I sell all our common property, and I take the money and I go and gamble with it. So I'm stealing assets from us, and I'm depriving my wife of having access to funds. This will also include a typical situation where I refuse that my wife she wants to work, and I say no, because that's a way to control her. So the next one that we will look at is intimidation. Okay, that's verbal or written death threats. Typical in South Africa, sending strange items, dolls without a head, dead flowers, coffins, things as such. So it's intimidating someone by means of objects or by means of words. Harassment, okay, some of these items may seem like it's the same thing, but there's a specific definition to each one. Harassment, we can look at, it is repeatedly watching the victim outside of near a house or at her work, at the school. So basically it is a presence that you are present there. It can also be constantly phoning the victim, or very important, getting someone else to phone this person or to make contact with this person. That is also harassment. So I know that I cannot speak to this person, but I tell my friend, hey, listen, please do this for me. So that would also come down to harassment. Okay, then something very near to this is stalking, but this is where someone actually approaches you constantly, where they come up and they approach you, they ask you questions, they want to talk to you, or they want something from you against your will. So they are forcing you to be in a conversation, or alternatively in a transaction where you do not want to be part of. Damage to property. Typical example would be, I am now angry at my wife, and I go to the house and I now take a knife and I stab the chair and I cause damage. I break the windows, etc. So it's economical damage to everyone, but it's also a form of intimidation, but by means of damaging property. And the last one is unauthorized entry to a victim's residence. For example, I break off a lock, I kick down a door, I climb down, or I climb over a wall in order to gain access to your property and to you.
Okay. And how can I identify if I am a victim of domestic violence?
Okay. Without applying the Act directly, we actually have a tool that is released by government. It's a risk assessment tool for domestic violence. It's a few questions that if you answer yes to any of these questions, you might be at risk of domestic violence or continued domestic violence. I'm going to run through the list quickly. So if you answer yes to any of these questions, you might be at risk. Okay, it is a risk assessment. Okay, so in terms of this, we are referring to the abuser and the victim. Okay, so the first question is one of 15. So any of them you can say yes or no. Has your abuser ever threatened to kill, harm you or your family? If someone has, then that possibly you could be a victim of this. Okay, remember this is in a domestic sense. So the abuser must form part of your domestic environment. Okay. Has your abuser ever threatened or physically assaulted you or your family, or arranged for someone else to do so with a weapon or a dangerous object like a knife or a firearm, etc.? Has your abuser ever, this is now question 3, has your abuser ever harmed or killed a family pet or threatened to do so? So if yes, that's also a possibility. Number 4, are you afraid of your abuser harming your unborn child or children who live with you? And this is now a feeling of fear from your side. So it's a subjective thing. Has your abuser ever been convicted of a violation of a protection order? That's okay. Question 6. Does your abuser constantly insult, humiliate, degrade, or blame you for all his problems or cause you emotional hurt? These are factors that pop up with normal cases of this nature. Number 7, has your abuser constantly stalked or harassed you in person, on social media, or via text or email, or arranged for someone else to stalk or monitor you? This is actually something that is coming up now in recent times, and I mean the past 3 years, where it has moved from an in-person thing to a I have 7 different phone numbers and I'm sending you messages constantly. Okay, has your abuser ever damaged your property, for example, deflating your tires or breaking windows or doors? Number 9, has your abuser ever raped you, attempted to rape you, or forced you to do any sexual acts that you did not consent to? Number 10, does your abuser control your access to your money or take money without your permission or refuse you to allow to work to earn an income? As we discussed earlier, this would be under the economical abuse side. Number 11, does your partner have access to a firearm or a dangerous weapon? As this could lead to something happening in future of a violent nature. Do you think your abuser has a problem with substance abuse, such as alcohol, drugs, or prescription drugs? And when he uses this, does it actually make him more violent? So that's also something to consider. Is your partner jealous towards you, display possessive behavior, or he's trying to control you? If that is present, it's also a sign that it could be domestic violence. Is your partner on bail or parole, or has served a time of imprisonment, or has recently been released from custody in relation to an offense involving violence? It's also a factor to take into consideration. Is the violence or controlling behavior becoming worse? Okay, so this is a risk assessment tool that is used. So any of these questions that if you say yes to them, in terms of the knowledge that you have, you could be in a situation where you are either currently living with domestic violence or at risk of domestic violence.
Okay, and we can definitely provide this risk assessment tool to our clients, correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So if anyone is interested, I will give you our contact details at the end of the segment. Please do reach out and we will definitely make sure that you have access to this. So Michael, if I am a victim of domestic violence, what can I do if I'm suffering in the privacy of my own home? What sort of steps can I do or take in order to get help?
Okay, so there's various things to do, but most of it comes down to a protection order. Okay, so it's not always possible. I mean, if you're in a violent situation, yes, it's easy to say, no, you need to move out. You need to get out of there. But I mean, we have to understand that in South Africa, that's not always a possibility. You do not have an alternative home to go to. But thankfully, a protection order also makes provision for that, where you are still in the same house with this person, but there's certain boundaries set. Okay, so I'm going to explain what a protection order is. It is a court order that is issued by a magistrate to stop any person from committing any act of domestic violence against another person if they are in a domestic relationship. So it could come down to you cannot talk to this person anymore, or you may not have physical contact with this person anymore. It depends on the situation. So what usually happens is I go to court, and you can get this on the same day. I go to court and I say, I feel that I need a domestic violence protection order. I do an affidavit. In that affidavit, I set out my feelings and my version. The court will usually then approve that and give an interim protection order. And then a new date would be allocated for the final hearing. So for example, I can go today, I get my interim protection order, it is served on my partner, and then we get a date for, let's say, the 1st of December. And then both parties will come forward and we will say, okay, this is my version, this is his version, or alternatively, I bring legal representation and he brings legal representation. And then when the facts are in front of the court decides, does this actually warrant a final protection order, or was it maybe a frivolous thing? So that is the process that is taken, but you are granted protection from the first day with an interim protection order. That interim protection order is not a lesser court order, it's just for a specific period of time.
Okay. And how long does the whole process take? Like, how long would it take for me to acquire a protection order?
Okay, ideally, and I'm explaining this in an ideal world because this is how it is supposed to work. You can go to court now and you can apply for it and you should have it by the end of the day. You will have to go to court, but that is the ideal way. Sometimes you first go to the police station tells you, no, go to the magistrate's court and you go do it there. But I mean, we also have a situation with COVID and So I'm not saying each and every person that's going is going to get it today, but that's how it's supposed to be.
Okay. And if my abuser disobeys the protection order, what recourse action is then put in place there?
Okay, well, it is a transgression of a court order. So your norm, if it is a situation, I'm going to use an example. I have a protection order against my wife has a protection order against me. I can no longer enter or speak to her in the common property that we live in. And now I make attempts to talk to her, and I try to insult her, or I try to have physical contact with her. That transgression can get me arrested. So with your court order, you then call the police, or you go to the police and say, listen, here is the court order, this is what he's doing, and the police will come out, they must come out, investigate the matter, and if he is a threat, they need to remove him from that situation.
Okay, okay, great stuff. I'd also like us to look at the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill. If you can take us through what purpose it serves and whether or not it has actually been implemented at this point.
Okay. So as the name states, it is a bill at this point in time. It was introduced in 2020. Now, of course, during all the years, the legislator has realized that the current Domestic Violence Act that we have does not make provision for everything. And it's usually how acts work. Times change, and then the types of incidents change, and then you have to adapt the law. Okay, so it is inserting, the amendment bill brings in new definitions, new facilitation for protection orders, etc. But it is expanding the scope of current legislation. So at this point in time, it is still with the National Council of Provinces. Now it goes through 6 or 7 stages, but it's now at the National Council of Provinces for approval. They might approve it, they might send it back for rework. But if they approve it, then it needs to be assented to after that, and then it gets sworn in as legislation at the end of the day. In terms of a timeline, I can't really tell you if it will be done tomorrow or in 3 years' time, because it all depends on the legislative process. It could be that the National Council of Provinces approves it tomorrow and it's assented to within 6 months, or alternatively, it could go back and forth for the next 2 years. Okay, all right. And then I want us to, take a step back and look at some entitlements in the workplace for women. For example, if I fall pregnant and I need to take maternity leave, what is my maternity leave entitlement? Okay, so as a basic principle, you are entitled to 4 months unpaid maternity leave. Okay, so it is 4 months that you can use. As said, it is unpaid, but you're also entitled to support from the Department of Labor in that period in terms of UIF. There's a few requirements with regards to this. You can use the maternity leave as per the Act. It says you have to be a month beforehand, but I mean, you can speak to your employer, and a lot of people rather prefer it to have it closer to the date of the delivery of the baby, so they have more time afterwards with the child. So it's 4 months, and you have to give your employer at least a month's notice ahead of time that you will be taking maternity leave. So you can't go to your employer today and say, well, I'm off tomorrow for 4 months. Okay. And then any other family responsibility leave that I'm entitled to as a woman? Okay, family responsibility is an entitlement not just for women, for men as well. But it does affect a woman as well. But once again, it's all about the basis of being treated equally. Family responsibility, if you have worked for your employer for more than 4 months, you start to get your entitlement of family responsibility. Now, family responsibility is 4 days that you can use for very specific events. Okay, so it's not any family crisis. So I'm going to list the events, and then I want the people listening to apply to their situation. Okay, so firstly, it would be, there's 2 factors with regards to a child. For the husband now, it would be when the child is born, but we also have paternity leave now also working into that. And the second one is the employer's child or adopted child is sick. Then you can take family responsibility leave. The other one is a death of an employee's spouse or life partner, the death of the employee's parents, adoptive parents, grandchild, grandparents, brother or sister. Okay, so it is not a situation that if my grandmother is sick, I can take family responsibility. No, it's only with if my child is sick, I can take. So there's two factors with the child: the birth of your child and when your child is sick, and of course when they are deceased. And then the other ones are the death of a life partner or a family member, mostly close related, mother, father, grandparents, brother, sister, children, and grandchildren. That is when you can use family responsibility leave. So it's 4 days that you can use per year.
Okay, great stuff. And then in closing, Michael, is there any words of just guidance that you'd like to share with our guests? Any tips? Just a final word from you.
Yes, keeping it strictly legal, as I'm not a psychologist.
Of course.
The topics we have discussed today is not something that you can write down in a book and it's final. The issues that we are discussing is much broader in terms of domestic violence, gender-based violence. If you are in a situation where you feel, you don't have to be 100% sure, where you feel that you might be in such a situation, rather seek help and get confirmation about it and get help instead of waiting. Once again, this is just from a legal perspective. The help is out there, and also there are government structures and institutions that are supposed to help with this as well. But you need to step forward, and I think that's the only way that we as a nation can address this, is by people stepping up.
Of course, of course. And from you, Simone, is there any final word that you'd like to share with our guests?
Yes, well, I agree with Michael. It's time for people to step up in terms of when you see something, say something also. And that's also, it applies to life and to the working environment. I mean, there's a lot of people who these types of harassment happen to, and they just go, oh, well, that's, you know, sort of par for the course. But if these things happen to you, say something, because you might not be the only one. So it's very important that people understand that it's a type of conduct that does not go away with silence. It goes away when you talk about it.
100%, 100%. I have to say that, you know, it takes a community to actually look out for the next person. And I think we have to stand in unity. If you see something wrong, speak up, you know, whether it's at work or in your private space, speak up and, you know, help the next person mobilize in order to get help. Because sometimes it's a matter of you feel like you can't go out of your home and seek help. You know, you kind of suffer in silence. And I think now is the time to sort of change that status quo, you know, change it. We are a legal companion. We are, you know, a partner in life. And if you are struggling, if you are suffering in silence, now is your time to speak up. We are available for you. And all the consultations are confidential. So you don't have to feel like you will be judged or you'll be shunned. Because if you don't speak up, then you'll never get the help that you need. So I am opening up the doors. You know, we are available. We're here to help. We're here to make your lives a little bit easier, you know, even if it's a personal matter or a legal matter, we are available for you guys. I urge you to please contact us, reach out to us. You can call us on 0860 587 587, or you can WhatsApp us, which is, I think, the best route, super user friendly. and convenient. Our WhatsApp line is 071-526-8527, or email, pop us an email on info@legalandtax.co.za. To Michael and Simone, thank you so much for joining me, guys. It's been amazing. You know, you guys are the experts. So I've learned a lot. I'm sure our guests have learned a lot. Thank you so much. And to everyone that took the time out to join us today, I hope it's been worth it. And I hope to see you guys in our next edition, which is in September, to celebrate Heritage Month. I'm excited about that. Yeah, so until then, take care. And we're here. We're waiting on you to reach out to us and let us be of assistance to you in your lives.